my book was called Democrat to Deplorable. I was definitely a Democrat. I voted for Obama in 2008. I voted for Bill Clinton. I thought being a Democrat was the only sane, smart place to be. I thought it was the only compassionate place to be. And my whole world has changed over the last 10 years on this. And what I've come to understand is that I had principles then that are the same principles that I have now. And so every position that I have or interest that I take, it's based on these principles with logic that carry them out. And you can just take that same set of principles and apply it to each new novel circumstance, and you get a sort of similar policy prescription. The Democrats don't seem to have any in America, don't seem to have any in the United States, don't seem to have any moral anchoring or logical anchoring or principle anchoring, which allows them sort of careen wildly to the left. How did your transformation happen? I mean, would you always considered yourself to be conservative-ish or whatever we are on the right or whatever this is? Or
I still don't consider myself to be, I don't call myself conservative because I mean, I believe in things which are traditionally liberal things. I believe in things which may be traditional conservative things. I don't know what to call myself, but it's a very funny thing. Your observation is, I don't like to make the sweeping generalizations of political individuals, but as a party, you're talking about no principles and it allows for endless evolution or regression. I put together just a short montage of our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. I think it was 6 months ago when he had facial hair giving a speech. And he says, what about people talking about vaccination? He says, what about people with medical conditions, people with allergies, people with deep religious convictions that don't want to get vaccinated? We're not the type of country that makes vaccinations mandatory. 6 months later, he's running an election ad. It starts off with verbatim, I believe vaccinations should be mandatory for airline and train travel. And I juxtapose the two same statements coming out of the same individual. Maybe when he shaved his beard, something clicked inside. He says, on the one hand, 6 months ago, we're not a country that makes vaccines mandatory. 6 months later, I believe vaccines should be mandatory. And it's like, with the caveat that it's for trains and planes, but that's a distinction without a difference as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if it's a political phenomenon, but at the very least with this individual, with Aaron O'Toole, who now comes out in support of vaccine passports, there is no you're right, core principle that doesn't change over time. You don't get to do evil things just because it's for the greater good. My thesis in philosophy, I coined it. It was called deontological consequentialism, where consequentialism is the idea that you can do whatever you want if it maximizes the good. So I don't want to use any really bad examples because I don't want to run afoul of YouTube, but end one young person's life if it saves 10 people. And I'll say, so that's the consequentialist way of looking at it. If you kill one to save 10, it can be justified. And I said, no, you have to have a form of deontology behind your consequentialism in order for it to mean anything. Because if you're not maximizing anything by committing evil. And so you have to maximize the good in order to preserve the good. And so it's consequentialism, but for deontological purposes. But it seems like our politicians, there's no core principle. It's just either whatever good to get elected or whatever they feel that day. And some people say it's evolution. I'll say when you basically come back on diametrically opposed positions, it's not evolution, it's just outright hypocrisy. Yeah. And I know where we see it a lot more in my view, but we're seeing it from the conservatives just as much. So I don't think it's politically aligned. I think it's just maybe a sign of the times.
Could you please define deontological for some of our listeners? I mean, typically my channel is deep dive, academic dive, professors and PhDs, and we read their books and we dig in. So this question is not out of field for what we're doing here. Can you explain what you mean by that, please?
And I hope it's accurate, but deontological meaning like certain core fundamental ethical principles that you cannot violate. So you have Kant, it was Kant's categorical imperatives. Like, you can never lie. So, if the Nazis are coming and say, do you have someone here? You have to tell the truth because lying is a categorical imperative. Well, I think most of us would disagree with that. Then others would disagree. Like, a terrorist says, you kill that one person or I'm going to blow up a plane, and say, well, I'm going to save 150 people by committing an atrocity myself, but only on one person. So that's consequentialism, or maybe it's not utilitarianism, it's consequentialism. So deontology is the idea being you maximize the ethical good, but it's a complicated formula. So they talk about deontology as sort of like moral principles or imperatives, and then you talk about utilitarianism or consequentialism, which is more of a matter of fact and not a matter of ethics. I hope that sounds about right.
Yeah, no, that definitely helps. And it's interesting to examine all of the sort of, surface political goings-ons, and then trying to sort of back into what the core philosophical or political philosophical position is. And that is what I'm at. There's no grabbing onto that for me looking at people on the left. It's all relativism, it's all historicism, it's all progressivism, it's all there's no real history, there's no real truth to men, there's only truth to mankind, there's only truth to each man in each era, and nothing is universal. And I have spent a lot of time studying now ancient texts, the founding texts, and like trying to understand where people's philosophies have been throughout time, and just trying to come down to like a core political philosophy that is going to be the best for everybody, or at least just have a freaking political philosophy. There's no political philosophy on the left.
No, there isn't. And especially, from the progressive side, I mean, the best example, I guess, that would illustrate it is the debate on transgender athletes, where one has to appreciate that they once upon a time created the distinction between male and female, XY and XX sports, because there were biological differences that created a situation where women can't compete with men in men's sports. So you create this distinction in order to preserve and protect the rights of women. And then that was the principle. That would be like sort of the rule that we all deserve equal rights. And when there's certain biological factors that create a non-competitive playing field, you create a division to protect the rights of those respective playing fields. Then you get into the progressivism of saying, and again, it's not a question of saying that transgender individuals should be denied rights where biology is irrelevant. That is no one that I know, no one in my sphere and myself in particular, espouse that belief. Where there are no biological differences that could account for the discrimination, then there shouldn't be. I mean, that was the reason why you have different gender sports. But then you get into this progressivism where you say, well, now in order to be so tolerant, we have to ignore certain biological factors which were the root of previous laws to create equality. And in so doing, you actually create inequality for the group that you had hitherto sought equality for. And that's where, when you have an evolution without core principles, it turns into something of a regression where you are in fact implementing policies in the name of equality that are creating an injustice that you had historically sought to overcome. And I guess that's a concrete example of how anchorless progressivism that doesn't respect the actual fundamental underlying reasons for the initial protection in the first place creates an injustice.
Yeah. Well, any philosophy that is like 100% focused on, like, we can reduce risk to zero, we can reduce evil in the world to zero, we can reduce all bad things to zero, we can make humans perfect, we can just use science and technology and technocracy and specialists and experts. All we have to do is just expert harder, guys. We just have to expert harder. We just have the scientific method harder to make everything perfect in this world, and to protect, to make everything perfect in this world, and to reduce all the evil down to zero. This is at the core of the COVID zero philosophy, right? Which is that
and had anyone tried to sell us on COVID zero from day one, and no one would have gotten on board, because it's impossible. We know it's impossible, and you're not going to get to COVID zero. You're not going to get to any virus zero. At some point, it becomes a question of management, which some states, some provinces, some countries appreciate. Others don't, for whatever the reason.
I wish that they would have come out and said 15 days to COVID zero. It's the moving goalposts, man. It's the moving goalposts that make it impossible. And the reason they have to move the goalposts is because zero is, you can never get there.
And imagine where we are now. Now it's gone to, we have a population which it's over 70%, if not over 80, double vaccinated. It's like over 90, depending on your demographic. Over 70 years in Canada, 95+% vaccination rate. We've achieved every goal they've ever said, and it's only now they come in with a vaccine passport to try to demonize and blame everything on the minority that's not vaccinated, and the numbers are where they are. And like at some point you realize, like I've said this before, but COVID has become an industry for the government, and they're going to keep it going because. Can you imagine, like 2 years ago, the government did something else other than manage a virus, and now it's the be all and end all of the existence of the government, and it's given them unprecedented powers. And we've respected, we've adhered to every measure that they've put along the way. And as the more you get down the line, the more it gets extreme, and not vice versa. But that is government nature. They will never relinquish a power that they've usurped, and people don't really realize that. And then you just get into the situation where people have lost so much. They say, oh, it's for the greater good. I lost all my money at the casino, but at least it's going to go to tax dollars and support a local community.